everybody, this is RaspberryBeryl back at it again for another stream. Hello everybody, welcome to the finale of Sunsets and Freedom, the Minecraft YouTube fanfic reading. Let me make sure my microphone actually picked any of that up. Let's see. Okay, I think we're good. Hooray, it's time for the finale. I am so excited. I hope I can actually read everything because these are some long chapters, but oh my gosh, I'm so excited. And yes, we definitely left off on a cliffhanger last time, so let's see. Will the crew succeed with their mission of rescuing Tommy? We turn the wave off. Okay, well, I say let's not waste any time. Let's dive right in. Please forgive me if I stutter, hesitate, or mispronounce anything, and for any noises in the background. Sunsets and Freedom by Annex on AO3. This is chapter 16, titled Reclaimed. Trigger warning for violence, burning, threatening children, blood, breaking bones, decapitation, attempted murder, mentions of abuse/past abuse, torture mention/torture, body horror. It sounds like a lot, but it's not all that bad. Let's go on. My microphone is really working, right? I'd be so sad if it isn't. Okay, I think it's working. Okay, here we go. We left off and they warped right in, and I think they punched Dream. I don't really remember. Rambo popped the three of them into the bottom floor of the compound. Funnily enough, right by the elevator doors. Purple froze a bit. He was back in the compound, and although he was fully aware he was safe and he was okay, but it was still startling to see the walls he had stared at for the beginning 13 years of his life. It was as quiet as it had been when he used to be there. He would definitely feel better with Ponk or even Puns with him. Despite liking Phil and having a weird S-level bond with Ronbu, he still barely knew these people. Being back in the compound, it was almost surreal. The feeling of awful, horrible nostalgia. It wasn't quite flashbacks or anything, but more like a feeling of something familiar in the worst way possible. It was familiar, but it wasn't good, like a bad habit. "Are you okay, mate?" Phil asked. Purple nodded. "Yeah, I'm fine," he answered, shaking his head and hopefully the feeling away. "This way," Purple said. He had been led from his cell to the elevator countless times, for missions, for fresh air, for many reasons. He knew the way. As long as Tommy was kept in his old cell, the hallways were as quiet as ever. Their footsteps echoed in the hallway. It was painted white and the floor was gray. Purple remembered hating how pristine this place looked whenever he was taken outside, how much he preferred the stone their cells were made out of. Stone, glass, and metal bars. It gave the place some character. No matter how little character it gave to the place, it made it slightly more bearable. Like they could pretend it wasn't the compound, but a house on the outside. Stupid but comforting. He remembered being allowed to paint when he was a kid, but whatever happened to these paintings, he wasn't sure. He briefly wondered if they were ever hung on the wall, but knew it was probably stupid to think about that. "You guys were kept really deep, huh?" Phil commented. After they had been walking for a bit, Purple nodded. "Dream didn't want us being found," Purple replied. Both of them were barely speaking above a whisper, and it still echoed. "How much further?" Rambu asked. Purple understood his apprehension with being there. This place was made to keep S-levels and use them for their powers, to torture them and force them to hurt others for a cause they didn't even know. Purple didn't wish it on anyone and figured they should probably hurry up a bit. "Not too much further," Purple answered. "A couple more hallways and we should be there," Rambu nodded. "It's terrifying in here," Phil commented. "I can't imagine being forced to stay here, especially not as a child." "It's something you learn. It was all I knew. Tommy was the one who had the outside knowledge. I was here since I was 2 or 3 or something," Purple muttered. "I hate it, but it's all I knew for a long time." The group wasn't sure why they were whispering. No one was here but Tommy, and it was inevitable that Dream knew people were here. There was no reason to whisper, and yet all three of them spoke in a low voice. Perhaps not a whisper, but still quiet. Maybe it was the feeling of the building, an unofficial seeming place where there was no noise. Although Purple remembered it all too well when it was screaming that filled these halls. His own or Tommy's didn't matter. It echoed all the same. "I'm sorry we didn't see it sooner," Phil muttered. "Dream made sure we were the best kept secret in the world. It's not your fault. There was no way to figure out that we were here. Sapnap and George were literally above us for who knows how long, and they didn't know. Don't beat yourself up over this, Purple told him, not even looking back at him, instead focused on getting to their old cells. This place is like a maze, Ranbu commented after a slightly tense pause. Even if someone knew we were here, they wouldn't be able to get in or back out, Purple said, but Tommy and I were taken in and out a decent amount of times. We're both memorized. We've both memorized the way in and out. It's probably how Tommy was able to escape, by memorizing the turns. Was that on purpose, or did you just happen to memorize the way? Ranbu asked. Purple shrugged. A little of both. We kind of just happened to memorize it, but escaping was always on our minds, so we probably were subconsciously memorizing it with the thought of escaping. We had plans, you know. We never did anything with them, considering we had more plans of once we were out rather than actually escape plans, but still, Purple replied. You don't have an actual escape plan? Phil asked. Purple shook his head. No, despite saying we were getting out and being very adamant about it to each other, escaping never really seemed real. It didn't seem like actually escaping was something that could happen, Purple explained. It's kind of depressing to think about it in retrospect, but at times we were like convinced we'd have a life outside of this just without escaping. I don't know. It's hard to keep hope in a situation like yours. Even if they were fleeting moments or ones that didn't make sense, it's good that you were able to keep hope at all, Phil told him. Purple shrugged, not quite knowing how to reply to that. Maybe he should have thanked him, but it seemed awkward now. I wonder how they're doing up there, Ranbu commented, nervously. They're capable, Phil said, a determined look on his face. Ranbu could only nod, a little nervous for Tebo, but hoping for the best. Scene skip. Dream cried out in agony when he felt the fire in his legs. He hadn't been able to react quick enough and especially hadn't expected Sapnap, of all people, to attack him. In a split second, he realized the top of his compound was gone. The first floor had completely disappeared. He looked over to George when the fire subsided, only to find him half passed out in none other than Carl Jacob's arms. So they had known, or at least found out, and now were no longer on his side. They must have met up with Carl and Quackity when Dream had left them in the city. In retrospect, it probably wasn't the best idea, but he couldn't risk Tommy waking up in his trunk and alerting the two of them that he was kidnapping a child. Sapnap and George were powerful on their own, but together, when they actually decided to stop arguing and use their strengths together, they were pretty strong. They might have been able to take Dream by surprise there, like they knew they're here, like they had here. He had no way to get into the compound, no way to get to Tommy. He guessed the Vroop he had heard before was a teleportation power. They were already inside, and now he knew for a fact that there were 2 S-level kids in his compound, and he couldn't get to either of them. Not to mention his leg was now severely injured to the point where standing seemed like a chore. Trash, Shit muttered. He had a choice to make right now. Sprint and get far away without Tommy, or heal and sprint only a short distance. He thought about not healing until tomorrow. Sure, it'd be painful, but he supposed all he had to do was find and kill Puns to get purpled. It would have been more difficult to find him, but after this he doubted they'd be letting Tommy out of their sights anytime soon. Purpled would probably be easier, since Puns seemingly just wanted to play hero for once in his life. It's over, Dream. Let's do this quietly and no one else dies, Puns called out, stepping out of the woods. Well, that plan was seemingly over. There were a lot of people around him. Too many, and he knew things were not going to go well. Wilbur and Techno, too. They were probably the most dangerous out of everyone, especially together. Anything Dream did, lie, run, or fight, it would be over once they got a read on them. As it looked like already Wilbur was reading him and Techno was ready to start at a moment's notice. This was decidedly not good. He'd have to act fast, too. If Puns was here, it meant that one wrong move on Dream's part with no backup plan could mean a bullet going between his eyes. Puns rarely missed, even when Dream was running. It didn't mean he couldn't miss, but Puns could still hit him when he just ran, just not in the right place, most likely. This was not looking good for him. George was still conscious, which was scary too, considering he just glitched an entire top floor of a building away. George could basically do anything right now. He'd just pass out afterwards, for who knows how long, or if he'd even wake up. Sapnap looked about ready to burn him again if he healed within his range. Oh, this was definitely not looking good. His opinions were low, and even if he did get out of this, how on earth would he get someone to help him with his plans? Dang it, was it really a lose-lose situation? However, there was a way out, which Dream realized when he looked to his side. He noticed a child. A kid. The same one he shoved into the closet, and although he tried hard not to think about it too much or else Wilbur would realize that he was planning, Dream decided to do the one thing he knew for sure he could do, threaten a kid. He healed, the burns not hurting anymore, as he sped over to the child and held the knife to his throat, although only one person actively reacted. I swear to God, if even one exists, I will kill you if you try it, Schlatt hissed. Dream vaguely remembered someone, probably Quackity, mentioning the fact that Schlatt had a son. He supposed this was him. It probably wasn't smart to threaten the guy that could theoretically create a nuclear bomb's son, but it was the only thing he could think of without thinking all too much. It was almost second nature. Dream, wasn't that a problem? Dang, wasn't that a problem? Then let me go and we shouldn't have a problem, Dream hissed. You've got to be kidding me, right? The kid muttered. He wasn't concerned, and neither was the rest of the group. A couple of them even looked remotely relieved. That was both sad and concerning for Dream. What? Try it. I dare you, the kid replied. Go on. Slit my throat. Dream was fed up at this point and raked his knife against the kid's throat. Nothing happened. He tried again and again. When the results didn't change, the kid threw his head back and hit Dream in the nose with a sickening crack, causing him to stumble backwards, letting him go. Looks like you failed at capturing another one, the kid huffed. I'm indestructible, dummy, and you took my friend. A good thing about being indestructible is that I am a weapon, and he lunged at Dream. Tubbo was beyond pissed, for multiple reasons, but this guy had the frickin' nerve to try and use him as a hostage while his best friends were down in the basement of this fricker's child torture chamber trying to save themselves was the last straw. He lunged forwards and tackled Dream using the element of surprise and his entire body weight against Dream. They both fell to the ground and Tubbo began punching the stuff out of Dream. His hands wouldn't hurt and the skin wouldn't break, so Tubbo didn't bother holding back. Not to mention Dream's nose was already broken and bleeding from where Tubbo headbutted him. Unfortunately, despite everything, Tubbo was a child, and a shorter one at that. He was easily tossed aside by Dream. He hit the ground with an oof, but was, obviously, not hurt. With that, Dream had disappeared into the forest surrounding them. Tubbo! Schlatt called, rushing to his side. Are you okay? Tubbo shook it off. I'm fine, he huffed. Where did he go? Tubbo stood up, brushing off the dirt from his pants. He left, Carl yelled, helping George up from the ground. Dang it, Tubbo muttered. You got a good number of hits on him. Glad I could teach you something, Schlatt laughed without any humor and ruffled Tubbo's hair. I didn't stop him, though, Tubbo murmured, more to himself than anything. No one expected you to, Wilbur said, jogging over with Techno right behind him. You did good, kid. Made him bleed a decent amount, Techno commented. All right, but what now? Tubbo asked. He's gone, and sure, we'll probably get Tommy back, but are we going to live our lives trapped inside or followed? How is that much better? We could burn down the forest, Sapnap asked, holding his hands up, luckily not yet ignited. Bad lowered his hand. No, he replied. Don't worry about Sapis Napis, Quackity exclaimed. We have a perimeter set up, not to mention some extra backup, and then he laughed, making a total of no one feel better about what was about to happen. Frick, that I'm going to search for that guy. Our perimeter is solid. We have an electric fence up since he hasn't set it off yet. Means he's still around here somewhere, Schlatt muttered. And then a scream was heard pretty deep in the forest. Definitely past their perimeter. You were saying? Scene skip. The three continued back down into the compound, looking for Tommy. They had been walking for a decent amount of time at this point. Not too long, but it was definitely felt like a much longer time than it really was. The finding and saving Tommy, not to mention the dread of what if they lost Dream while they were down here. The fact that they might have always have to be running or hiding was a bad life. It would be like the compound with just a little bit more freedom and no beatings. It wasn't a life anyone wanted. Through this door. We should be right at the cells when we get through, Purple told them. They stood there for a moment. Do we knock? Rambu asked. Purple looked at him with a baffled look. Do we knock? Really? He asked. Well, I don't know. I just knocked to make sure he knows it's not a dream or something, Rambu defended, crossing his arms. No, we don't knock, Purple said, maintaining eye contact with Rambu as he opened the door and swung it open. As soon as it was open, though, he sprinted inside. Tommy! He called. There was a clatter and the movement of metal chains. Purple? Tommy called. Purple rushed with a sigh into the hallway. Oh, Purple muttered slightly hysterically. They had been reunited. Of course, they were still between bars, and it was an unfortunate area to be reunited in. However, it was almost poetic. They were reunited in the worst place of their lives, but it had been where they had met and where they bonded. Purple grasped the bars between them. Hey, he muttered. His voice cracked. Tommy laughed slightly. Hi, he replied. Funny meeting you here. Not really here by choice, Tommy replied. I'm here to pick up my dummy friend. He got himself kidnapped right before we were supposed to meet up. You seen anyone around? You're so stupid, Tommy laughed. Purple couldn't help but snort as well. Tommy! Rambu gasped, running into the room as well. How do, Rambu? Tommy asked, not moving from his spot in the shackles. Tommy? Phil's voice came rushing into the room. Oh gods. Phil! Tommy exclaimed. We have new and old friends. I assume you've met? Yes, Purple rolled his eyes, clearly used to and already slightly annoyed by Tommy's antics. Good. Then we can skip introductions and get straight to the rescuing me part, because I don't know about you, but I'm really very claustrophobic and this is a very small room. He jingled the chains around his wrists and with very limited chains, and I don't feel like having my, fourth panic attack in the last 48 or so hours, so please get me out of here. Despite beginning in a joking tone, his voice got quieter, more strained and tighter. He was definitely having a rough time right about now and was trying very hard not to cry. Rambu? Phil said. Rambu nodded. I'm on it. He replied and teleported instantly into the cell. He went over to Tommy and put a hand on his arm before teleporting the both of them outside the cell. He was free now. Thank you, Tommy breathed, wiping furiously at his eyes. Purple didn't waste any time before throwing his arms around Tommy and hugging him tightly. Tommy didn't hesitate to hug back. It wasn't the best place to have a reunion. The hallway was a bit cramped and definitely held bad memories for the both of them. But they hadn't seen each other in almost a year. After only knowing each other as the only good thing in their lives for almost an entire time of their lives alive. They needed this. They needed this right here and right now. Rambu and Phil looked on with smiles of their own as the two boys cried and found each other once more. We should probably go back up there, Rambu Purple muttered, making no movement to end the hug. They're fighting Dream. We should, Tommy agreed, also not letting go. They sat there for a minute, tightly gripping the other's shirt. Purple was wearing what Ponk referred to as his comfort hoodie, while Tommy was back in his uniform Dream normally forced them to wear. A manly white and gray outfit that had short sleeves. Purple remembered his own having long sleeves and only now realized that Tommy didn't have long sleeves, so he couldn't accidentally disintegrate his shirt. He snorted audibly at the thought. Tommy pulled away, keeping his hands on Purple's arms. You okay? I don't think I've been better, Purple laughed. I don't like it here. Me neither. We really should leave, Tommy sighed, dropping his hands from Purple's arms. Are you ready? Rambu asked. Don't need to rush, mate. This is important, and I'm sure they've got everything under control up there, Phil said. I'm sure, Tommy replied. Plus, I'm not sure I want to miss Nikki knocking Dream the frick out. From her powers or her fists? Rambu asked. Could not care less, Tommy laughed. Purple smiled, and the four of them teleported out of the compound and back to above ground. Most of the team opted to stay back by the medical center with Quackity, Carl, Sapnap, Tubbo, Techno, Wilbur, Schlatt, and George, supported by the twins, followed by the sound of a scream. They made it to the electric fence where they were met with Dream, his hands bound and feet bound in some sort of slime-like substance. Charlie! Quackity exclaimed. Oh, Sapnap and Carl muttered to each other. I got him! Charlie exclaimed. Dream did not look so happy. His fabric mask around his mouth stained with blood, and he didn't look like he healed at all. His nose was still broken, and his face was now covered in dirt. What exactly happened? Wilbur asked, looking at Dream as Techno went over to the nearby control pad to turn off the electricity. Charlie can detach limbs and create slime. He's basically made of the stuff, Quackity explained. Charlie nodded excitedly. He ran into me and took my head before tripping and falling. My slime is practically impossible to get out of, Charlie said happily, clearly very proud that he was able to get Dream. Looking at him, his head seemed slightly too small for his body. He had clearly just regrew it or whatever. Although that did mean there was a decapitated head lying around somewhere in the forest. One made of slime for that matter, meaning it wasn't going to decay anytime soon. Probably best never to go into the woods lest they see that head. Let's just get him back to Nikki, or Puns for all I care, Techno muttered, and they broke open the fence so they could get Charlie and Dream back into the barrier. He was definitely tired. Whoever broke his nose and gave him that black eye probably slowed him down enough for me to group him, Charlie smiled. Tubbo smirked. Oh, it's going to be a lot worse now that I know he can't get out of that slime, Tubbo exclaimed, only to be grabbed by his father. That's enough for now, Schlatt said. Let's get him back to our building and then we can talk about integration methods and how we want to punish this frick. He sighed. Tubbo lunged anyway, not getting near him but making Dream flinch. Tubbo cackled, his laughter echoing slightly into the forest as they walked back to their camp. The three teleported just in time to see a group coming back in Dream in tow. Tubbo's face lit up and he sprinted to them and jumped into Tommy, knocking them both down. Ow, ow, Tommy whined. Good to see you too, Tubbo. Tommy let his head rest on the ground as Tubbo hugged him. In the daylight, it was much easier to see that Tommy did have a couple more bruises and a decent cut on his cheek. It hadn't been bandaged, so they had to assume it wasn't that bad. But they'd have Ponk take a look at it anyway. He was also wearing the gloves again. No one made him take them off, but on the way home, but they definitely would have him take them off then. The rest got to their little setup with Dream as Tommy and Tubbo were getting up. Tommy grabbed Purple's hand as they made eye contact with him, knowing he was defeated and couldn't get to them. They looked at each other, then back to him as they both smirked at him and laughed at his current state. Both of them were free and relatively unharmed, while he was sitting there with a broken nose, a black eye, and covered in slime. They had won. Nikki? Tommy asked. Nikki stepped up and cracked her knuckles. Can I do this? She asked. She looked at him and he gave a warm smile. Please do, she said. Tommy smiled back and slowly undid his gloves as he approached. Dream tried to back away, but Techno and Wilbur kept him in place, unable to move away from Tommy. Tommy pressed his hand against Dream's chest, feeling his energy enter his system, draining his energy bit by bit until he fell unconscious, and the twins didn't bother holding him up, letting him drop against the ground once again. Dream was out. Tommy hadn't held on long enough to kill him, but Dream didn't know that. He went out thinking he was dying, and Tommy felt an odd sort of pleasure in that. He should probably worry about that right now, but he was just glad he didn't need to worry about Dream anymore. All of a sudden, Wilbur was wrapping his arms around Tommy, hugging him close to his chest. Techno was ruffling his hair, looking at him with a warm smile, and Tommy rarely saw on him. I'm so frickin' proud of you, Wilbur muttered into his ear. Yeah, they had really won. And that was the end of chapter 16. One more chapter to go. Let's do it. And in this chapter, I love it, we have, right before the chapter begins, a link to some fan art that I drew for the author, which I will show at the end. Let me open it quickly to make sure the link still works. Okay, good. I will show the fan art when we end the chapter. Okay, chapter 17, the last chapter. Sunsets aren't a goodbye, but merely a see you later. Trigger warnings for mentions of child abuse, mentions of past alcoholism, and trauma mentions. Let's begin. Wilbur was honestly afraid when he realized the screaming was coming from the training room. The shouts and screams hadn't ceased for a long time now. He wasn't quite sure how long, but it was long enough that whatever was happening was starting to get concerning. Sure, screams weren't exactly uncommon in the SBI building, not when you're 4 overpowered teenagers in the same building, all of which were traumatized by one thing or another. Yelling and screaming was something that came with living with teenagers. But the training room was where the powers were being tested to their limits, and all 4 of the teenagers had powers to kill one another with, in a simple thought. Not that they would. They cared far too much for each other to willingly or intentionally. But that didn't mean accidents didn't happen. There had been screaming for a decent amount of time now. It wasn't long, continuous scream, but rather yelling and screaming mixed, none of which made any sense to Wilbur. He couldn't make out any of the words that were being yelled. One would think that there was a life-threatening injury or any injury at all that the kids would be smart enough to get an adult. You're right, they would be smart enough to do that, but they wouldn't do it thinking themselves capable of handling any situation that came at them since they were so powerful. Unfortunately, none of them had any semblance of healing powers. Even more unfortunately for Wilbur, specifically, He happened to be the only one around. Most of SBI lived in the building, but it happened to be their week off, meaning most of them had left for one reason or another. Vacation, visiting family, romantic weekends, etc. Wilbur was alone with the 4 kids while Phil and Techno went to go pick up food. Nikki had gone home to visit family. Schlatt had gone to supervise Quackity and his fiancées at Vegas. Ponk went home to grab their stuff to move, and Punz left for an undisclosed reason. Probably one last job or pulling out of the mercenary game. Hopefully for good. Purple loudly discussed his hate for killing people, even if it had been nothing to do with the conversation, whenever Punz entered the room. No one mentioned it until Punz yelled, "I get it! I'll quit!" and Purple stopped. But regardless, since all 4 of them had been either reunited or just met recently, it was probably bad to separate them, since S-levels were so rare, their behavior, especially when it came to needing to have a relationship with each other. Since so few were born so close together, but they figured it was close to A-levels. In basic terms, they needed to stay together for at least a little while, or else they'd be clinging with their nearest A-level, the closest thing they could get to an S-level. Another possibility is that they'd get irritable, and if they were away long enough, they could straight up hate each other when coming back. Wilbur's classmates in middle school had that happen with their cousin. They had been A-levels, and they bonded, but not long enough. For the rest of their lives, they hated each other. He could only imagine what would happen to S-levels. So in the end, all of their guardians decided it would be best for the S-level kids to stay in the SBI building while they went off to do their own things, as to not have to worry about hurting any of them. Besides, Wilbur, Phil, and Techno were all going to be there, so they'd be safe. They should have been anyway. Ooh, pardon me. They should have been anyway. Wilbur was still hearing screaming, so he rushed to the gym and continuously and cautiously approached the door. He couldn't read people through walls. He had to be able to see them before he could tell what their next move was, so he needed to open the doors. The yelling was now much louder, and he could vaguely hear that people were saying. There was a lot of cussing. Although that was normal, both Tubbo and Tommy tended to curse. Apparently Purple did too. Slowly but firmly, Wilbur opened the doors to the gym / training room. Inside was pure, straight, absolute frickin' chaos. Rambu was on the ceiling light, seemingly passed out on the light, while the other 3 were shouting at each other at him. Tubbo had Tommy on his shoulders, which was funny because Tommy was slightly taller than Tubbo, but all in all fair, since Tubbo probably could support Tommy better than Tommy could support him. "You have to climb up," Tommy yelled at Purple, clearly trying to get him to try to reach Rambu, which was stupid since they'd be nowhere near the height they needed to reach the ceiling, considering it was at least 14 feet in the air. "That's not gonna work," Purple yelled back. "We have to get a ladder or something. We're going to get him hurt if we all get on." "I won't," Tubbo replied, shifting his stance to better balance Tommy. "Not all of us are indestructible," Purple huffed, arms crossed. "Some of us break easily." "So what you're saying is you're weak," Tommy teased. "What I'm saying is that being drugged for 13 years makes it easy for me to break bones," Purple deadpanned. "Oh, come on, my trauma isn't a valid argument here," Tommy whined. Purple stuck his tongue out. "My dad was an alcoholic," Tubbo cut in. "Thank you, Tubbo," Tommy replied. Tubbo nodded. "How are we going to get him down?" Purple asked, moving swiftly along. "We could get Wilbur," Tubbo asked. "What is he going to do?" Tommy asked back, wobbling. "Rambu's unconscious and his powers are practically useless in this situation." "Well, what do you frickin' suggest?" Tubbo huffed, ready to drop Tommy. "I don't know," Tommy yelled. "Can we trigger like a sleep teleport? He might teleport into something dangerous, dummy," Purple replied. "He can't control it all the time when he's awake, let alone when he's asleep." "I know that," Tommy exclaimed. "I knew him first. I'm just wondering if we can startle him down." "No!" both of them exclaimed. Tommy crossed his arms and muttered to himself. Tubbo dropped Tommy after all that onto the mat behind him so that he wasn't hurt, but the effort was still there. Wilbur couldn't help but laugh at them at this point, startling the 3 of them. "Wilbur!" Tommy exclaimed, nervously. "We weren't doing anything. How much did you see?" "Enough," he replied, leaning on the door frame. "How did he even get up there?" All 3 of the kids looked at him again before looking back at Wilbur. "We were training a bit and he seemed to be getting tired, but we had already thrown something at him and he panicked, I guess," Tommy said. "He passed out up there after teleporting," Tubbo replied. "He's okay. Just up high." "I'm gonna call Phil," Wilbur replied. "No!" All 3 of them winced. "He's going to do that disappointed dad thing," Tommy huffed. "Yeah, he's going to put his hands up on his hips and tell us he's happy we're using our powers, but we should be more careful." Purple crossed his arms again. "And then he's going to hover around Rambu for the rest of the day," Tubbo rolled his eyes. "So then we can't do anything fun." Uh-huh, Wilbur said slowly. They had Phil pinned pretty well, he had to admit. But how are we going to get him down? The three looked at each other, but none of them seemed to know what was next. Ladder? Tommy asked. Yes, and where would we lean it against? Wilbur asked. Rambo was in the middle of the room, not near any of the walls. A ladder would not work unless it was a really tall standalone one, which they didn't have. I don't frickin' know, Tommy muttered, pouting a little bit. Right, I'm calling Phil, Wilbur laughed lightly. He took out his phone. The kids sighed and sat down on the mat they had placed down earlier to prevent as much injury as possible. They hoped Rambo wouldn't fall on them, but he hadn't thus far, so it was probably safe. Wilbur was slightly reluctant about calling Phil. He had been insanely apprehensive about leaving the kids. He was scared about what would happen to them if he left. Techno practically dragged him out of the house when they left to get food. He knew a call would freak Phil out or have him rush home, probably leaving Techno alone to get food. Sure, it'd be great to get him here soon, but Rambo was going to be fine. He hadn't fallen so far and he probably would stick up there until Phil got home or he woke up. Either way, he'd probably be fine, but Phil would kill him if he didn't call. All in all, he just didn't want to worry his father. It would have been fine. He remembered how Phil was after Tommy's rescue mission. Flashback. Tommy stood stunned in front of Dream's unconscious body. For a moment, everyone was quiet, and it was clear that Tommy wasn't all there, but Wilbur couldn't wait any longer. He had almost lost his baby brother for the second time to the same person. He was done waiting. Instead, he rushed forward, Techno at his side, and wrapped Tommy into a hug. He seemed to knock him out of whatever was happening. Techno ruffled Tommy's hair beside Wilbur, but Phil stood behind them, his face pale, both relief and fear on his face. It made sense. Tommy was safe, but Phil knew. He knew what Tommy was thinking when he touched Dream. He knew that Dream thought Tommy was going to kill him, and he knew Tommy knew that. He was afraid of that. Phil was a little scared, not of Tommy, but for him. But he waited until Wilbur pulled back before he walked over himself and pulled Tommy into the tight embrace. Phil tugged him into his chest and pushed his head lightly to the crook of his neck. Tommy sighed, and the tension left his body as he was pulled into his father's arms. Phil was his father, legally or not. They were family, and maybe it took a while to get there, and there had been some bumps in the road, big ones, but they were a family again. It had been a long time since he had truly had his family with him. He thought he had them before, when they realized who Tommy was, but they had him back now. But he hadn't truly been back, because there was a part of him missing, purpled, and he was always going to be over his shoulder, never fully relaxing or being himself out of fear. But now, he had his friend back. He had his missing piece, and he no longer had anything to fear. Dream was down, and Dream was gone. He was going to stay gone as well. SBI might not have been fully legal, but dang it all to hell if Phil wasn't praising every god that may or may not exist that SBI legally could interrogate anyone they arrest. Phil had gone through the mountains upon mountains of paperwork and investigations to allow that to happen, to allow SBI to be considered law enforcement without actually being law enforcement, that they could interrogate Dream to the fullest extent. It wasn't necessary, but Phil couldn't wait to psychologically tear that man down. He was sure Ponk and Puns would want to turn as well, not to mention the twins. He gripped Tommy a little tighter, running his fingers through his hair, allowing him to calm down, although Tommy seemed to be crying now. At least it felt like it, and if the slight dampness on the neck told him anything, Tommy was crying. It was over, and Tommy was finally letting himself be a kid who was just finished the hardest thing in his life. He was a kid, and he was allowing himself to cry. Phil was the only person Tommy could cry to. He had cried when Purple found him, but Phil had been there too. Tommy could only cry to his father, to the man who saved him, 3 times now, taking him in when Wilbur and Techno found him, letting him stay with SBI when Tuppo found him, and now when he banded his company together and gave him his missing piece and his family back. He could only cry to the man who gave him all of that, only to him, only around him, only if Phil was there, because if Phil was there, he was saved. Wilbur had always been observant. He noticed Tommy only cried, only felt like he could around Phil. He knew this as they hugged and knew that Tommy was safe, and he truly felt safe now. Back to the present. Because Tommy felt safe around Phil, had been decently clingy, not as much as Tommy when he had his bad days, but enough that it was noticeable. In fact, he hadn't wanted to leave at all. He hadn't wanted to leave any of the kids, considering how close Dream was to taking both Tommy and Tubbo. It was scary for any of them, but Phil felt a bigger responsibility for this. Wilbur knew this and felt pretty guilty as he pressed the call button on Phil's contact. Wilbur? What? Is everything okay? Phil's threatening voice came from the other line. Wilbur sighed to himself. He hated it when Phil got like this. It only happened a few times before, but it was never good. Everyone's fine. You don't need to worry. There was just a little incident, but I promise you everything is okay. Rambu just happened to overwork himself a little bit, and the kids were training, Wilbur said. Phil audibly let out a breath on the other line. Oh, okay, but he's okay? He didn't hurt himself when he fell? Phil asked. Well, he sort of hasn't fallen, Wilbur laughed nervously. What? Phil said. He teleported onto one of the gym lights and is kind of just up there. He's safe, he hasn't fallen, and he doesn't seem like he will. I just wanted to get you here as soon as you could. Wilbur, Phil growled and hung up. Yeah, okay, he's kind of mad, but he's probably on his way here now, Wilbur said, sitting on the mat with the rest of them. Told you, Tommy hummed. We're in trouble, Purple sighed. I think he's mad at me, not you guys, Wilbur replied. Tubbo shrugged. So we have Phil, George, Quackity, and maybe Schlatt, Tubbo said. Tommy nodded. Yeah, do you think if Nikki had a thick enough cloud she could do it? Tommy asked. I don't think it can be dense enough. Her dust isn't very thick. It's only powerful, Purple answered. Wilbur's stomach had dropped when they mentioned George, but now things didn't seem to be what he thought. Wait, what are we talking about? Wilbur asked. Who would have saved Rambu if you weren't the one in charge? Purple stated bluntly. Ouch, Wilbur muttered, but secretly relieved, because he was afraid of what they were talking about when it came to George and Sapnap. They had apologized and it had gone well, but Tommy and Purple had a tendency to casually mention their trauma, like they had just a minute ago, but they never really let on how they really felt. Flashback. Sapnap shoved George forward with him as they approached the teens. They hadn't known. They needed to let them know that they were sorry, then they should have known that their best friend, or ex-best friend, was hurting them so badly. The teens turned to them and Tommy unconsciously gripped Tubbo's sweater sleeve. Purple shifted to ever so slightly in front of Tommy, but both things were obvious to George and Sapnap. They shifted. We wanted to apologize to you, Sapnap started. We didn't know, George muttered. But it's not an excuse. We should have. We've been in the compound many times and yet we had no clue, Sapnap said. We're sorry, George told them. We would have stopped Dream if we had known. It's not your fault, Tommy muttered. It was built to hide us, Purple added. You couldn't have known. We should have. The elevator was in plain sight and we couldn't even see it. We should have, Sapnap told them. You helped rescue us now. That's enough, Purple said. It's past us now, and Dream's gone, so I don't care. You should, George said. What? Purple asked. You should care, he repeated. What happened to you was terrible, and it was our friend who did it to you. Sure, we couldn't have known, and maybe it's not our fault, but you know best. Wasn't there a chance? No, Purple said. I never saw a chance, he whispered. Purple, Tommy started. Listen, what happened was fricked, but we do care. We do care, but not about what you did or didn't do. It's not okay what happened to us, but it's okay that you didn't know. Maybe I still hold on to things, Purple said, scratching at his bandages, but I never knew you two. Dream spoke about you, but not like you knew us. Only him. It's not your fault. Just stop blaming yourselves, Tommy finished for him. Let it stop with him. Okay, George said. I don't think I can, but I won't bother you with it, Sapnap said. Thank you, Purple muttered. Maybe we can start over in a place that isn't stained for all of us? Tommy told them. I think we'd like that, George and Sapnap agreed. Flash to the present. Phil had gotten Rambu off the light and the day planned out the same for what everything the kids said. Phil was clinging and the lecture had followed as they stated. None of them were particularly upset by it, but it was boring to have to hear again. Luckily, they were asleep now, having gotten tired after eating an amount of junk food that only kids can, and a ton of Disney movies that Purple hadn't seen yet. They'd have to have a chat with Ponk when he came back. They're doing really well, Wilbur whispered. As well as they can be, being them and having gone through what they went through, Techno muttered. They're strong, Phil said, running his hand through both Tubbo and Rambu's hair. Tommy had curled up on Wilbur's side, and Purple had surprisingly fallen asleep with his head rested on Techno's shoulder. It took him a full hour before he could relax after that. They are, Techno agreed. They'll be fine, Wilbur muttered, watching the sunset from the living room window. And that was the end of Sunsets in Freedom by Annex on AO3. Oh my gosh! I can't believe we finished it! That was so great! Yeah, the last chapter, you know, it was a nice calm epilogue. Not too much happened, but it was really enjoyable. So the last chapter was technically chapter 16, but we had a nice calm time here. And now let me see if I can get this thing working. Okay, so let me move myself out of the way. Bloop. Here is the fan art that I did for Sunsets in Freedom. Here is Purpled, the Prophet, and Tommy the Witherer. And they're wearing their clothes from the compound. Oh, I love drawing that. Oh my gosh. And I just don't know what to say now. I can't believe we finished that story. I wish I could interview Annex, but I'm pretty sure Annex has moved on to other things at this point, so I don't think they want to talk about the Minecraft stuff right now. But if we could, I would totally interview Annex and be like, tell us all your secrets. So I do want to say this, one of the reasons this fic means so much to me is it was one of the first fics I ever read, if not the first one. I think this might have been the first fanfic that I read. Like, I had read Star Versus stories on DeviantArt and stuff, but I had never been on AO3 and I had never read a fanfic before. So this story was just really special to me. And I knew I had to honor that specialness by reading it on stream. And we got asked, what story are we going to read next? We're, of course, going to continue with, one Star Versus story a week. And then the next Minecraft story we're going to be reading is It's Close Enough to Perfect. What's it called? I think it's called It's Close Enough to Perfect. Why Can't It Last? I think that's what it's called. And it's by another sort of friend of mine who I promised we would read the fic of. So we gotta get through that one too. And then I'll be done with all the fics I promised people I would read. Okay, yeah, the fic that we're going to be reading next is called It's Close Enough to Perfect. Why Does It Have to Hurt a Little Bit? By Love Lucy Goosey, which is a lot longer fic, so will probably take a long time to read. But I had started reading this next fic, I had started trying to record videos for both of these fics last summer, and I got through a couple of them, but it just didn't work out. So I hope to read It's Close Enough to Perfect, Why Does It Hurt a Little Bit on stream, but it might be some pre-recorded videos just because of how long it is, but I hope to at least do a couple chapters on stream. Can't believe we finished Sunsets of Freedom. I'm just so super excited. Just thank you guys for joining me so much. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I guess we're gonna end it off here. And if you want recommendations for stories and stuff, I can try to come up with some recommendations. There's just so many that I like, so I'd have to get out my paperwork and make a big list, and I can put them maybe on the Discord server if you want them. And who knows, maybe we can get permission to read some of them on stream. That'd be super cool. And maybe we could read another Annex fic after we finish the Loosey Goosey one. because I do really love Theater Major, and Theater Major is a nice chill one too. So I think maybe I'll plan for that, but you know, plans can change. But thank you guys so much for coming to the stream today. I hope you all enjoyed this story and all. I really enjoyed reading it with all of you, and I know Minecraft stuff isn't like everyone's cup of tea, but this is something I really care about, so I'm happy that people are okay with me continuing to make work related to this Minecraft stuff, because it makes me really happy. So thank you guys, have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you guys in the next stream. Bye guys, bye 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 bye. Have a great rest of your day, and see you next time. Goodbye.